You are listening to the Billy D's podcast.
We are waiting just a minute for everyone to engage the live stream. Remember, you can find the Billy D's podcast on your favorite platform.
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the program. We wait just a moment for everyone to lock on to the live stream. And sometimes it takes just a moment for people to refresh their app or whatever it is that they are using. We are live tonight on X. We are also live on Facebook and a number of other different places, but those are probably the two main ones, X in particular. Just a reminder, live next week, our guest scheduled to appear, as they say, is Anna Matson. So we're very excited about that. We're going to wait. I'm going to pause rather for just a second, and then we're going to go ahead and begin the podcast. Thank you. All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the program. As always, I am absolutely thrilled that you are here. If you've never checked us out before, we are primarily an interview and a commentary-based podcast. You can find the Billy D's podcast anywhere you find podcasts. On Thursday nights, usually, we go live. Sometimes we go live on a Friday or Saturday night. This is Friday, April 11th, a fine day to go live. We go live 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hope everyone is relaxing for the weekend if you have that ability. Some of us have to work, do other things, but at any rate, I hope that you're enjoying your weekend. A number of things have come up, and we're going to touch on them that I find extraordinary because they are so rare. I'm going to talk a little bit about the helicopter crash, and I'm also going to talk about the collapse in the Dominican Republic. I'm going to talk about, from what I know, this is an opinion-based program, and it's hopefully something to, give you something to talk about, something to have your next conversation about, something to chew over, and that's basically what we do here. Sometimes I try to inject a little humor and some perspective. I try to go a place that other places don't go. I've said before, if you listen to a conservative commentator, that's great. Hey, there's nothing wrong with that. But you know what their opinion is going to be on most major topics. It's just a matter of how they're going to get there. Same with the liberal commentators. I lean certain ways on certain subjects for sure, but I do try to go, into an area that you don't necessarily expect. It's not right or left. And I don't even like being described as someone who is in the middle, who is in the center, because that's still on a scale. And I believe there's too much of that. We need to, common sense is a word we're hearing a lot about lately. And objective reasoning, I think, is another term that we maybe need to kick around a little bit. But what I find about the helicopter crash and what I find about the collapse being unusual, I'm going to talk about why that is, in my opinion, unusual. I'm also going to follow up on tariffs. That's going to be a subject for a very, very long time, to be sure. And I'm also going to touch on this Tesla in terms of the vandalism and the other things that are going around those vehicles, as well as the dealerships and some other things. So let's start with the helicopter crash. In case you haven't heard, within the last day, a very sad and tragic helicopter crash happened. There were 6 people on board, 5 passengers, 1 pilot. The 5 people that were passengers were an entire family, which is absolutely horrific. I don't know how else to describe it. A man and woman. The victims included Augustin Escobar, 49, his wife, and I hope I'm saying her name correctly, Mercedes. I believe it's Camprubi Montal, and their 3 children, 2 sons, ages 4 and 11, along with a daughter, And as we go live today, April 9th, if I have this correct, she was supposed to turn 9 today. And the family was visiting from Spain. Now, this is this has been fuel for conspiracy theories. And I always caution against those. It's one thing to speculate, look at the facts, and say maybe this happened, maybe that happened. But people anymore seem to dive right into this conspiracy theory. And this person was a high up at Siemens, which is a tech company. I believe that tech company is actually German. I could be wrong about that, but from what I know about the history of that company. And so there's always, there must be something behind it. I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to go there. For me to make the jump to a conspiracy, there really has to be something out of place. Really has to be something, what's the word I'm looking for here? Extraordinary. Something that's really connecting two dots together that shouldn't be connected. And it's just to throw out a lot of facts about this person works for this company and this, that, and the other thing. That doesn't really do anything. I do have a video. I'm going to play just a short bit of it. And for the audio audience, I'll describe it. But here we go. What you will have on this video is the rotor blades that actually came completely off the helicopter are like spinning and then fall into the water. And then, boy, that horrible drop. That's just absolutely terrifying there. Horrible accident. That helicopter fell upside down, and it appeared not only was the rotor blades gone off the top of the helicopter, but the tail seemed to be gone as well. Now, this is unusual, and I'm going to talk about why the nightclub incident is also very unusual, but it's very unusual for any type of aircraft to just simply come apart. I mean, it happens, but it is very rare that you're just flying along and the thing just disintegrates. Usually, it's something involving the weather. Sometimes it's landing and takeoff, which is the most dangerous part of any flight, and where there's some sort of a mechanical error of some kind that contributed to a crash. But very seldom does a plane just fly along, a helicopter just fly along, and all of a sudden there's all these pieces dropping. That kind of catastrophic mechanical failure is very rare. And whatever happened here, I've heard people say that he ran out of fuel. The pilot did. The pilot's name, I believe he was 36 years old. It's been reported as Sean Johnson. I've also seen it presented as Sean Keith Johnson. On here again, I hope I'm saying that correctly. This was a person who was certified to fly commercial helicopters. And I've also noticed some other reports that, he has experience in the armed services, and Navy SEALs in particular. So this is somebody that seems very competent. And some of the reports, here again, I could be very wrong about this, but some of the reports I'm hearing about running out of fuel, I don't believe that's accurate. I believe where that's coming from is he did make a report that he was going to land and refuel. And at that point in the radio transmission, nothing indicated that it was wrong. So what could have caused this? Here again, the mechanical failure for something that catastrophic to happen. I don't know as much about helicopters as I do planes, but that's for something to just come apart like that. I would be willing to bet that whatever happened, and this is just conjecture, whatever happened with the main rotor system, the main blades, probably cut off the rear of the plane, the tail end of the plane. Now, this is something that I've run into online being reported as a phenomenon called mast bumping. That's mast bumping. That's where the mast that holds your rear stabilizer in place gets cut off when the blades tip, and the blades can tip enough to actually sever the rear of the helicopter. I'm going to say that that is unlikely. That typically, here again, I don't know as much about helicopters as I do planes, but that is something that is typically associated with bad weather. And it may have been a little cloudy that day, it may have been, a little misty or whatever, but there was nothing out of the ordinary happening with the weather. Typically, wind, drafts, violent drafts, can bend an aircraft, a helicopter in particular, in a way that those blades, the helicopter itself is bending, and then you also have the blades bending as they are spinning. And it is conceivable that the tilt mechanism, which does help propel the helicopter forward, when you rise up in a helicopter, it takes you straight up, and then those blades tilt forward a little bit and propel the helicopter forward. So it is possible that that mechanism can be stretched to its absolute limit if the helicopter itself is distorted, the body of the helicopter is distorted, and then those blades can become distorted. The other way, in a very tragic way, both going against each other. Here again, that is more common with either extremely bad weather, something that is putting the aircraft under a lot of physical stress, or a very out of the ordinary maneuver, something like going into a steep dive or a steep climb at very high speed, very suddenly. That is something that could distort, those mechanisms as well. But there's no evidence that that happened. So it seems like, he's flying along normally, and he makes a radio call saying, hey, everything's great here. We're flying along, and I'm paraphrasing, and I'm just going to stop in for some fuel. And I presume he's going to either go on another flight or continue on with that one. So whatever happened here, here again, I'm going to take the conspiracy side of it out of the scenario for right now, but I'm going to say that this was a catastrophic mechanical failure. Now, could it be from a lack of maintenance? The one thing that a lot of these tour helicopters, sometimes get mixed reviews. I've run across stats that indicate they're fairly safe, considering the amount of flying that they do, because it's not just once or twice. I mean, they're flying all day long. Who knows how many up and downs they do. I've heard some stats that indicate, well, this is pretty safe. And then I've run across some other analysis that says some of these tour helicopters, especially around extremely populated areas or around areas that have a lot of air traffic, that these things need to be better regulated. And that might very well be the case. We had an incident where a military helicopter collided with a passenger jet here not too long ago. And here again, these are very congested areas in some cases. So is this a possible maintenance issue? I'm going to touch on this when I talk about the collapse in the Dominican Republic. But this is something that here again, with my limited knowledge of aircraft and especially helicopters, this is something that I don't associate with bad maintenance. This is something that to me is structural. This is something that is very heavy, involved a lot of heavy parts, and is very catastrophic. There are, I've seen some diagrams and stuff of the limited bolting structures that go onto these helicopters that hold those blades on. But here again, that's because of the ability they have to be able to move a certain way, not only spin but also go back and forth. And the bolting mechanisms, even though they're simple in a diagram, are very, very strong. So this isn't something that happens. When was the last time you heard of a helicopter flying and the blades just flying off, all of them at once, and then continue to spin up into the air? That does not happen very often. I don't recall that ever happening. I can't imagine that the pilot could have done anything with that kind of a catastrophic failure. Your odds are better in an airplane for the most part with engine failure because the wings, as you fly along, will provide a certain amount of support depending on the plane. Now, there's different scenarios there as well. But typically planes will give you some time to do a crash landing because you're probably going to go in at an angle towards the ground. You're going to like slide into first base. And you might have a chance. A heavy plane, maybe not. But typically planes, you'll at least have some time to manage how you hit. When you have something happen catastrophic to a helicopter, once something happens to that rotor system, there are no wings. There's no support. There's nothing to, prevent just dropping quite literally like a rock. This helicopter turned upside down on the way down. I imagine that it was. Here again, I don't want to speculate, and I certainly don't want to get morbid, but for a few seconds, I would imagine that the people on board knew that something very serious had happened. I find it to be very horrific in some of these cases when something happens to an airplane at high altitude, and you can take a long time to hit the ground, and that's a long time to be sitting in front of that windshield and have that ground coming at you at 300 miles an hour. That's got to be absolutely horrific. And here again, I don't want to get morbid, but in this case here, it was probably over in a few seconds. Apparently, at least two of them, we don't know which ones, were alive for a very short period of time. The rest of them were dead on the scene. I can only speculate that they were in very bad shape or unconscious. I've had some people say, well, isn't a helicopter crash survivable? Not under these conditions. Quite frankly, this is no different than taking your car and driving it off of a cliff. I mean, you just go straight down. I believe some of the optimistic reports at first were because here again, typically an aircraft doesn't just disintegrate in midair. Something mechanically is wrong. Oh, your oil pressure is dropping. And okay, well, at least you can guide yourself down with some control. You don't have the lift, but you can at least slow yourself down. And helicopters in this vicinity of water will have flotation devices. So if you do make a hard landing in water, it will stay afloat long enough that rescue can get there. But here again, this was so catastrophic, no different than driving a car off of a very high cliff. And they hit the water upside down. And the flotation devices did deploy, but here again, it was upside down, and this was after a very hard smack against the water. So unfortunately, this would have been something that was very hard to survive. If this is going to be something in regard to mast bumping, as I talked about, that will be interesting. I would suspect the first place they're going to look is the maintenance of this aircraft. It wasn't particularly old. I don't have it in front of me, but I believe it was roughly 20 years old. I could be wrong about that as well, but that's, you could go either way with that. You could say, well, it's a tried and true aircraft if it's been properly maintained. On the other hand, 20-year-old car, so maybe there was a fracture, There's a thing called metal fatigue. And here again, this is pure speculation. There's a thing called metal fatigue in aircraft where it isn't something like, somebody actually bent something or broke it, but over time, that metal is compressed and then it's let go. It's compressed and then it's let go. And it just keeps going. And it just fatigues. And one day you happen to be the unlucky one on aboard one of these vessels, and one of these aircraft, and it fails in a very catastrophic way. So if metal fatigue or a combination of maintenance that's supposed to catch metal fatigue, there's ways that they test for that with planes. So maybe it just didn't get the proper testing, something. But anyway, very horrible tragedy. Another horrible tragedy was, in fact, what happened at the Dominican Republic. This is where a nightclub, right now, as we go live, the death toll is over 200, many more injured. And I'm sure many of you have seen the videos either on the news or online, where this entire roof just fell. And it didn't fall as near as I can tell by the photographs of the aerial views. It seems like the roof fell in its entirety, meaning that it wasn't just a section. The whole thing just dropped. There's a lot about this one that I don't understand. I believe the nightclub was called the Jet Set, and it was in the Dominican Republic. Extremely horrible injuries. I can only imagine what it's like on the ground. But I'm a little bit more familiar with building structures. And I can tell you that here again, it is very unusual for a building to collapse onto itself simply from its own weight. That is, here again, I don't know of another time when that's happened. That is unusual, with the exception of something like an earthquake or a hurricane blowing through or something like that. Typically, structures do not fall that completely unto themselves under their own weight. Now, it's different if, let's say, for example, there was a big parade or a festival happening there and, 300 or 400 people got on the roof and started jumping up and down. Now you have a completely different situation. But from what I understand, this thing just fell. And the other thing I don't understand is, going through some of the video that's involved with this, it seems like there was a great deal of heavy concrete involved. And from what I understand, this was a single-story structure. I've been in a lot of nightclub environments, converted warehouses, those types of buildings. I've worked as a disc jockey, as a sound guy for musicians. I did a stint for a while there as a stand-up comedian, and being somewhat, knowledgeable about equipment, I was often asked to help with certain designs, certain installations of lighting and sound. I was up in those ceilings quite often. And typically you have a set of beams or trusses, something along that. And the roofs in these buildings are typically some sort of metal roofing. And on top of that, there is the standard roofing, the tile and tar and all this other stuff. There isn't tons of concrete up there. I don't understand where all this weight came from. Typically, these types of roofs are more apt to blow away in the case of a tornado or something like that than they are to fall straight down, especially with that incredible amount of force. That is very unusual. I don't know why that roof was that heavy to begin with, why there's so much concrete involved in the wreckage, and why it would fall so completely without any, earthquake. Or a lot of times when you see these concerts and stuff and there's people in the bleachers or at a football game, all the kids at these college games do these dances and they jump up and down in these stadiums. I'm a little nervous about that because you get that much weight up there in unison bouncing up and down, and that could be dangerous. All right, even for a structure that is built properly. So it didn't seem like anything like that happened. So I don't understand in this type of design why you would have a heavy roof, and I don't understand how this would fall so completely without an earthquake or something so suddenly and so completely. Here again, we're not talking about a section. We're talking about the entirety of the roof. It lends itself to questions like, was there remodeling involved? A lot of times in nightclubs, they don't like poles, they don't like pillars and other things. Did somebody take part of the support structure away? Or was this remodeled from another structure at another time and it wasn't done properly? I've heard some people say sometimes these places aren't well maintained. Here again, getting back to the maintenance issue, I don't know what type of maintenance issue would cause a roof to collapse like this. Because I went into a lot of these places as part of my job where these places were very unkept. You know, this building's been standing empty for 10 years. And it's usually some young guy. When I was younger, some young guy said, "Hey, you know what? I'm going to open a nightclub and make a ton of money." You know, so we go into these places and they're absolute disasters. You know, the walls are coming down, the plywood, or the drywall's a mess, the plumbing's in bad shape, the electrical's in bad shape. Everything has to be ripped out. You know, there's rodents, there's infestation, there's insects, there's all these other bad stuff. But the roof is in no danger of falling. That's a structural issue is kind of one of the last things in terms of the deterioration of a structure. If you just leave it somewhere unkept, the structural part of the building is probably going to be the last thing that goes because it's protected. You know, the framework or whatever thing is protected by the walls, by the roof, and the other things, and not too much happens to it. So, unless here again somebody's remodeling and takes out something that is part of the support structure, I just don't see maintenance. There's nothing you have to maintain to make sure a building keeps standing. You know, if there's something that's harmed the integrity of a building, you need a structural engineer to come in and check things out, not somebody who's sweeping the floor and changing light sockets. That's not part of normal maintenance by my experience. Now, somebody out there might tell me different, but I don't associate a catastrophic failure like an entire roof falling just because it wasn't well maintained. That I'm here again. The facts from the investigation will hopefully bear the truth out, and I could be wrong, but that's unusual if that's the case. I do want to follow up. Last week we talked a little bit about the China and the tariffs in general, but in particular China. And it seems like the sweeping tariffs have been paused. And so we got a little bit of reprieve there for at least a couple months. And with the exception of China. You know, I've heard everything from 100 to 140%. What it actually amounts to, I don't know. But we're talking about a lot of tariffs put in on goods coming in from China. And as you know, China is a place that imports a lot into the United States. And the thing of it is it's not just foreign companies interjecting foreign products into the United States. I made a comment that, and I had some people want me to follow up with this because I made a comment last week that it's just not a matter of things being built overseas and having them be cheaper. That's only part of the situation. The other part of it is that they can actually be built better. And I had some people ask me what I meant by that. And this isn't a slight on anybody's workmanship at all. But this has to do with the overall world economy. And I know people get mad when they hear that term. But let's say with tech products. All right, I'm going to pause and swallow hard on that one because that's a big part of my life. And tech is going to be very much a part of these China tariffs. Now, unless I have found out that there can be exceptions placed on some of the products that are coming in. But it's way too early to tell what's going to happen there. But with tech products, here's the thing. The supply chain for a lot of the tech products that we all love is in Asia. That's where all the goods originate from. So just saying, well, they have to bring a factory over here and build it. Okay. That could take up to 5 years. And you got to understand the workforce here in the United States. In China, you have almost an entire generation of vocationally skilled people. These aren't factory jobs like we normally consider them from the 1970s, where you're sitting at an assembly line and a part comes in front of you and you have 6 screws. You tighten those down, and you put this plate on, you tighten that down, and you attach a bunch of wires on the side. Okay, boom. And next one comes along, you do the same thing again. This is incorporated with automation. This is incorporated with AI. And the workers that are working in that environment are very skilled workers. And we do not have that here in any great degree. Okay. For whatever reason, any type of vocational work has been considered substandard in comparison with a college education. That isn't the case in Europe. Electricians, people who do woodwork, people who do things like that with custom built homes are very well respected, and they should be, because not everybody, for one, it's one thing to say it's physical work, and a lot of people don't want to do it, but those kinds of workers are skilled. They've spent years, they've spent apprenticeships, journeymen. They've gone through years and years of practicing their skills, and I got to tell you, I've known some of those types of individuals that are just, they can build anything. I got a couple buddies, I swear, could build a house, because there isn't anything they can't do. They were like that at a very young age. I mean, they were fixing things and improvising their bicycles and all this other kind of stuff when they were 10 or 11 years old. That comes naturally to some individuals. And instead of encouraging that, when we notice that happening with children, we should say, man, this kid is great with their hands. They can do just about anything. Let's help them. Let's help them along, encourage them, buy them tool sets for Christmas, all these other types of stuff, get them building stuff. Or in the case of electronics, that's one thing. I was lucky. I was lucky. Electronics was one of those things that came to me, and my parents encouraged it. And I was very lucky. A lot of times, kids have these skills and the parents, no, you're going to college. You're not going to work for a living. Well, I think the tide has come around on college education now. And I'm not by any means saying that an education is a bad thing. I'm not saying that at all. I'm not going to go there. Not yet. But I will say that it has been overvalued. It is not a fix-all for everything. I mean, what are you going to do with 50 million people that know how to do Excel? Okay, and if they're really good at doing Excel and they're really good at accounting, that's great. We got 50 million people that do all that. They make a good living and they want a nice new house. Now, who's going to build it? Even with technology, even with AI, there has to be workers that come with that. These materials don't arrive by themselves. Nails don't pound themselves. There's going to be automation involved. Certainly, that's coming in. Robotics is coming into the building industry. I have no doubt, but that brings in more skilled workers. That brings in people who know how to deal with electronics, who know how to program computers to run robotics, who know how to do all these other things. And that kind of work is being discouraged in the United States. So the education, I believe, as time goes along, is going to be more specialized. So if you want to go into the tech fields, I don't know that a 4-year, who needs to learn basket weaving and all this other kind of crap that they teach in school now. And a lot of the 4-year colleges anymore are indoctrination centers as much as they are schools. I until recently, I have never had the experience of business owners saying to me that they will not hire college kids until recently. That's how bad it is. I mean, there's been people debate the value of an education for years, but I've never had somebody say, I'm done with college kids. And that's because they don't know anything. They want to change the culture of the company. They're more interested in the social media aspect of things. And they don't know how to do shit, not to be too blunt. And they don't have any specialized skills, whether it be technical, sitting at a computer, whether it be math, whether it be anything, you know. And I can't stress this enough. We need to start diversifying how we think about education. For my money, everybody says, well, would you go to a doctor that didn't? No, I wouldn't. But here again, getting back to a 4-year education, I have some doctor buddies. I'd like to ask them, wouldn't it have been better if you had really great grades coming out of high school that would get you into a really good 4-year college, just to go into a medical prep school for a couple of years, then go into medical school and then go into your specialized training? That to me makes a lot more sense than learning about, you know, who knows what kind of history and what kind of media studies, social studies, and all this other kind of bullshit. And I would rather get people who need specialized training, specialized education, getting started on that a lot sooner. And for the people that are good with their hands, get them started on that sooner. We should have, you know, something the equivalent of college for people that want to be good with their hands, good builders, good welders, people who know how to run electricity safely. You know, one of the reasons that people have to come from when we have a bad hurricane and there's power lines down, people come from all these different states. And I have some buddies that do this. And I don't want to say they like hurricanes. They don't. But they go and they make a mountain of money. And some of them only work at certain times of the year because they get paid so much. You know, being out of state for 2 or 3 months here and there, they don't have to work the rest of the year. And the reason that these people get called out of state, they don't have to, but they do. The reason these people get called out from states that are on the other side of the country is that there isn't a whole lot of people in one place who know how to do that kind of work. So I think we need to start thinking about that. Just slapping a tariff on China and saying, oh, American manufacturing is going to come back. You're talking about a process that could take 5, 10, or 15 years. And in the short term, it could be painful for a lot of folks. You have to adjust. Your economy has to adjust on a major scale. Now, with that being said, I don't particularly have a lot of resistance to the idea of some of these tariffs because the United States has been, in a lot of cases, especially with European sections, the Asian part of the world, either we're hit with tariffs when we bring stuff in, or there's restrictions on how much American goods can be brought into those countries, and we've put up with it for years. And one of the reasons why we've put up with it for years is it does give us a certain amount of power because we provide blanket protection to those parts of the world, and that allows us to have our bases there. That's part of the thing that hasn't been discussed too much. But I think at this point in 2025, either those countries, I'm with President Trump on this, either they have to start paying for some of that protection and helping with the cost of it, or they have to start opening up the trade routes and allow American products to go in with the kind of speed and efficiency that we let them into this country. So there's a lot of, here again, and that's very case by case. And I would hope that some of these, I don't know how many countries are involved now, 50, 60, 70, I've heard different numbers. I hope they're all being taken in on a case-by-case basis. Some of these countries don't have the ability to pay for their security. They don't have a lot of the ability to do that. And they don't really have the ability to compete with the United States economy either. And putting a 50% tariff they put a 50% tariff on, let's say, Cadillacs coming into their country. Their country's the size of Rhode Island. How many Cadillacs go in there? It doesn't make any difference. You have to take these case by case situations and do what's best for that country and what's best for the United States. A good deal. That's what a good deal is. And the really big player, the one that could really rock the boat for the United States is China. You're talking about an extraordinarily large economy. You're talking about a military power. You're talking about an owner of a lot of land in the United States. So China is a special case. So we'll see what happens there. But I want to say, from my opinion, you have to take these things with tariffs on balance, and just make a sweeping statement like they're good or bad is probably not the case. But I can tell you, like I said, with some industries, it's not just as easy as bringing it back to the United States and everything's fine. It's not that easy, and I just kind of wanted to throw that out there. Okay, I'm going to talk about Tesla here. Not so much Tesla, but what's happening with Tesla due to Elon Musk and Doge. I said before that if you are a business person or you're in the entertainment industry, anything like that, and you get involved in politics, the chances that something could go wrong and all of a sudden people don't like you anymore is something that you have to consider going in. I'm okay with that. And I would be willing to bet, I can't speak for him, but I'd be willing to bet that Elon Musk is as well. You got to know going in that if you get involved in politics, there's going to be a certain amount of people say, I don't like you anymore. All right, fair enough. When it comes to violence, when it comes to vandalism, we're talking about shooting bullets into dealerships. We're talking about firebombing cars. That's another thing entirely. That is another thing entirely. That's something that could cost somebody their life. It could scar them or maim them for life. And getting back to the cars themselves, this is almost like terrorism or extortion. What they're doing is they're making private individuals afraid to buy and use these products. They're afraid. If you drive a Tesla, you may be afraid to park it somewhere. You might be afraid that you're going to be a victim of road rage. And these are people, for the most part, who are just people who are trying to get through the day. And I've got friends that drive Teslas, and most of them love them. They bought a product that they like, and for them, it's an investment. You're not talking about people who are filthy rich, and not that there's anything wrong with being filthy rich either, but my point is that a car and a home generally are the two biggest investments that most people will ever make unless you're filthy rich. Okay. I bought a new car last year. It was a General Motors product, and I got to tell you, I was a nervous wreck because I know that it's a big investment. You don't want to buy something and find out you don't like it, or it starts to have problems that it shouldn't be having for this stage in its life. And that can be an absolute nightmare. I mean, so these are decisions that people have sweated out because it's a big part of their life. And now all of a sudden they're afraid to drive it anywhere. Now tell me, what part of that is fair? What part of that is fair? And I got to tell you, some of these politicians, and both sides are guilty of this, when one side or the other is being victimized, the other side won't say, hey, look, we have our political differences, but this can't stand. We can't have this. Neither side will do that. And here is a perfect example of what I'm talking about right here.
Senator, what's your opinion of the violence against Tesla, their products? What are your thoughts on that? Do you denounce the violence against Tesla products and dealerships and cars in the streets?
I can't talk about Tesla, but Elon Musk is a disaster for America, and America knows it. Look at Wisconsin.
Chuck Schumer right there. I would say something, but I won't. He's an elected official, and I have a certain amount of respect for the position. Was it really that hard to say? Yeah, I don't like Elon Musk. What he's doing is awful. But people who have brought these products, they're not politicians. They're not business people who are affecting, anything in our world to any degree. They're all just people going to work, trying to get by with their lives like anybody else. Please don't bomb their fucking car. Would that been that hard to say? Would it really have been that hard to say for Chuck Schumer? Yeah, I don't like Elon Musk, but please don't do violence. Don't damage property of private individuals who had nothing to do with any of this stuff. Is that really that hard to say? He won't say it. I speculate on this, but I'm probably right. They don't say it because they like the fact that people are afraid to buy the car. They like it because it makes Elon suffer in their view. And the suffering that the individual is paying is worth the price as far as they are concerned. That can be the only explanation. Why wouldn't you say, hey, I don't like Elon Musk. I don't like Donald Trump. I don't like Tesla. But these people who are working in those dealerships, those people who are driving those vehicles are private individuals who made an investment and something they wanted to do for good transportation and for the comfort of their life. Leave them alone. Couldn't do it. That was too much. All right. I don't know what to say about that, but I'll leave it right there. Billy D's right here. Thank you so much for checking out the podcast. You can find the Billy D's podcast on all the major podcast platforms. We have a 10-year history on all of them. The listenership is fantastic, and we have such a good community of listeners. Thank you so much for being there for so many years. We started the Billy D's podcast. I've been doing podcasts and media for long before podcasting came along. And we experimented with a couple of different types of podcasts early on, and then what is now the Billy D's podcast in its current form is about 10 years old, and we've had some listeners that have been with us from the very beginning, and they are part of our listening family. And that is why when you subscribe to the Billy D's podcast or when you go to one of our social media accounts, we do not charge extra for extra content. We don't charge for subscriptions because our listeners should have free access to us. That is why we are here. And our listeners mean everything to us. The revenue streams and where they come from, we could talk about another time. It's involved in production and advertising and commercials and other things. But we don't ask the viewers to do anything other than tune in and enjoy themselves. At least I hope they enjoy themselves. You can find us on social media. I would say X is kind of like our social media home, and that's the old Twitter. At Billy D's is where you can find us there. And we do have a small but engaged group on the Facebook page, which is Billy D's Podcasts. And some of my associates, some other podcasters, and some other people involved in the business, their content is posted there as well, things that they are up to as well. Sometimes I'll do some behind-the-scenes videos. Sometimes I'll do reviews of different types of microphones, whatever. So we have a lot of fun there. It's not always directly related to the content that we do here on the podcast. But here again, all you have to do is Go to Billy D's Podcasts on Facebook and hit follow. That's it. It's free. And boy, would love to have you aboard. All right. Talk to you again next week. Thank you so much for checking us out. And I will talk to you again very, very soon.
Thank you for listening to the Billy D's podcast. Follow Billy D's on X @BillyD's for updates about the program.
Do you listen to music or audiobooks on streaming devices such as Sonos or Amazon speakers? How about on your car sound system? If you use Spotify, Audible, or Amazon Music on any of these systems, you can also listen to the Billy D's podcast the same way. Billy and his team go the extra mile to make sure our podcasts sound as good or better than anything on the radio. Listening to the Billy D's podcast has never been easier. You literally